Good morning, and thank you for joining us this morning. My name is Monica Kalunga, and I am the Outreach and Education Coordinator of the Washington Field Office. I am happy that you could join us. For this session, our presenter will provide you with an overview of the EEOC. We hope that you enjoy this session, and of course, we welcome your questions and comments. Next, I want to introduce you to our presenter, Thomas Colclough. Tom is the District Director of the EEOC's Charlotte District Office. Tom has over 25 years of experience with the EEOC investigating charges and complaints of discrimination and leading high-performing teams. He has served in various leadership positions at the EEOC. For example, Enforcement Supervisor, Local Director, Area Director, Systemic Coordinator, and Deputy District Director. On July 21st of this year, Tom was promoted to the position of District Director. In this position, he plays a key role in fulfilling the agency's mission through strategic enforcement management and planning. A native of North Carolina, Tom attended St. Augustine's College in Raleigh, North Carolina, where he received his bachelor's degree of science in business administration. He earned his master's degree from the University of North Carolina at Greensboro. Tom is also a graduate of the military's Command and General Staff College and the Office of Personnel Management's Federal Executive Institute. In 2005, Tom retired from the North Carolina National Guard after 23 years of service, active reserve and guard. That's great. At the rank of Lieutenant Colonel. He lives in Clayton, North Carolina with his wife, Cassandra, and has two adult children, Sarah and Grayson. So thank you again for being here. Tom, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Monica. And I'd like to thank each of you for allowing me to be here with you this morning. Just to give you an overview of EEOC. It is exciting for me to talk to you about EEOC, especially during HBCU week. As Monica mentioned, I went to an HBCU, St. Augustine's College, now St. Augustine's University. That is where I was introduced to EEOC, in which I became an intern from St. Aug over to the EEOC's Raleigh area office. But without further ado, I would like to talk to you about EEOC. And who we are and what we do. EEOC, we are the United States Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. We are the premier civil rights organization or agency within the United States, and I'd like to say in the world, because what I think that we do is we give hope. As you know, there are two important documents that we look at in the United States. One is the Constitution. The other is the Declaration of Independence. The Declaration of Independence, it gives three promises: life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. At EEOC, we help people realize those three promises because the way to get to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness is through employment if you're in the United States, because you have to be able to earn a living and make an income in order for you to get those things. That's where EEOC comes in, because we want to make sure that people are given that equal opportunity to be able to thrive and survive in today's workforce and the workforce of the future. Now, how do we get started? Well, I'd like to say that in 1964 is when the Civil Rights Act was passed. But I think that the genesis really started with President John F. Kennedy. In 1963, there was a lot of social unrest in the United States. In 1963, August specifically, there were, children that were being hosed down with water hoses across the U.S. A lot of unrest, a lot of racial tension. And so I think that, with that new technology called the television set, as President Kennedy was watching it, he decided, hey, we've got to do something about this. So he proposed the Civil Rights Act. Unfortunately, he did not get an opportunity to see it through. But Vice President Johnson, who then became president, he made sure that he worked tirelessly to make sure that the Civil Rights Act of 1964 was passed. As a result of the Civil Rights Act, EEOC was founded, and we opened our doors on July 2nd, 1965. Someone asked me a question this morning, so I'm going to go ahead and give you the answer. The first chair of EEOC was Franklin Delano Roosevelt Jr. Now, with the EEOC, it is comprised of a 5-member bipartisan commission, meaning there are 5 individuals who are appointed by the president to serve on the commission, and one of those individuals is the chair. Our current chair is Chair Janet Dillon, who we owe a lot of thanks and appreciation because we are able to work in this live virtual environment because of some things that were put in place during her tenure. So, but the bipartisan commission, what they do is they look at the structure of the commission and look at those things that, hey, how are we going to pass new rules and regulations that are for the benefit of the American workforce? Now, what is our mission? I think our mission is just super cool. Our mission, and I'm going to quote it for you, is to prevent and remedy unlawful employment discrimination and advance equal opportunity for all in the workplace. There's a couple of things that are certain in life. One is that we will age as long as we live, and 2 is you're going to have to work somewhere, unless you are born very, very wealthy. But if you're having to work, you want to make sure that you have that opportunity to excel in the workplace. That's our mission. And we fight for folk every single day to make sure that occurs. We also have a vision, and that vision is to make sure that there is a respectful and inclusive workplace with equal opportunity for all. You may or may not know that in the American workplace these days, there is sometimes a lack of respect in how we treat each other. So one of the things that EEOC recognizes is that has to be a vision, and that vision, making sure that workplaces are respectful and inclusive, goes along in helping to make sure that our mission is carried out. Um, Now, whose responsibility is it to make sure that that vision comes true? Um, it's each of our responsibilities because I was listening to someone this morning in a meeting I was in, and we were talking about culture. Well, culture comes with developing a mission, and also visions. And one thing that we talked about this morning was the culture. Now, if we want to make sure that a workplace is respectful and inclusive, it's not just up to the leadership of organizations. The culture is derived by the employees, meaning you and I are the people who make sure that that vision is carried out to have that respectful and inclusive workplace. So one of the things I'm going to ask each of you to do is to join with EEOC and myself in making sure that the mission and the vision is not just words, but it becomes a reality in our workplaces. Now, what you see here is just the offices of EEOC. And these are offices in our headquarters. These are the offices that make this great agency happen. There's the office of the chair, office of the general counsel, office of legal counsel, office of field programs, in which I'm a part of, the office of federal operations, the office of communication and legislative affairs, and the office of equal opportunity. They are a knit, tight group, and it takes each and every one of them performing their jobs and their duties to make sure that EEOC is able to enforce the laws that we have. Now, where's EEOC located? Well, I'd like to say that we are like a nationwide law firm because we're everywhere. We are everywhere. We have 15 district offices, and I like to proudly brag and say that Charlotte is the largest and the best district office in EEOC. But again, that's just me bragging because each of our 15 districts, we work like a nationwide law firm. We communicate, we talk to each other, we are family because we are all committed in making sure that we live up to our mission and our vision. So, we have offices in Philadelphia, in Charlotte, Miami, Dallas, Houston, Los Angeles, San Francisco. So if you ever have a desire to work for EEOC, just know we're everywhere in the US. then there's a place and an opportunity for you to come and grow with us. What are the protected bases? Well, with EEOC, I think it's very cool of how we look at this, because the protected bases of discrimination, they're just a few. And that is race, color, sex, religion, national origin, a disability, genetic information, and also age and retaliation. But there are some specific things that we look at when we investigate charges and complaints of employment discrimination. One of the things that I said to you is that the bases are, there are not very many bases, the race, color, sex, and etc. But the issues that we investigate, they are infinite, because a person could feel that they were discriminated because of their race based on being discharged, or not being paid at an equal wage, or a suspension, or not being given a benefit of employment. So again, the types of issues are infinite. Now, the Title VII of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, again, that's where we do the majority of our work, because it covers such issues such as race, color, sex, religion, national origin, and retaliation. And as I go through this presentation, you'll note that retaliation is also covered by all of the statutes that EEOC enforces. Now, for a person to be covered jurisdictionally under Title VII, the employer must employ 15 or more employees for each calendar workday of 20 or more weeks in the current or the preceding year. Believe it or not, that's a lot of employers have coverage under Title VII. But believe it or not, the majority of employers in America are smaller employers that may not be covered by Title VII. But again, Title VII is where we do the majority of our work. The other thing is that under Title VII is that, as I stated, 15 or more employees, 20 or more for 20 or more employed for 20 or more weeks in the current or the preceding year. So again, a great many folk will be covered by Title VII. As you look at your fast food industries, production industries, in factories, restaurants, all types of organizations covered by Title VII. Next is Age Discrimination in Employment Act of 1967. One of the things that I like to think about is in 1967, if you ever watched a TV show with Don Draper, okay, and in that show, Don Draper, he's a company man, okay, and typically he's always had one career, and the mandatory retirement age back in those days was 62 years old, and people didn't expect to live past the age of 70. But today, things have changed, especially as we are going through COVID-19. Why? Because we have a more diverse workforce, much more diverse. People work multiple careers. Most people, that I know, they've had 4 or 5 jobs, especially, when we look at folk who have graduated from colleges, 10, 15 years ago, they've switched to multiple jobs. Also, people work longer. When people think about retirement these days, I don't really hear a lot of people talk about retirement. They talk about vacations. They talk about the things that they're going to do in their life, but they don't talk about retirement. And a lot of people, they are living longer into their 80s and their 90s. I was at an event and recently, and it was like at a gym, and a lot of the people who were in there exercising, they were in their 80s, and they were, or either, when I go exercising these days, people in their 80s and some in their 90s that I see on the track running, those people also go to work. So age is not what it was. The other thing that's important to know about the Age Discrimination in Employment Act is there is really no limits on how long a person can work. One of the examples that I recall was a bank that I was investigating years ago. And on their employment application, they specifically put on there that all employees had to retire at the age of 70. Well, that is a violation of the Age Discrimination in Employment Act because there is no limit. There are a few exceptions to that, and that is with high policymaking officials, but very few exceptions in the statute. So for the most part, discrimination should not occur. Now, who's covered? It's for persons age 40 and over. I like to always think, when I think of the Age Discrimination in the Employment Act, of who's covered and who does it affect when discrimination occurs. Again, it is for people who are age 40 and over, or the people who are covered. But let's say that a person is 55 years of age, married, couple of kids are in college, and that individual loses their job. Well, it's not just an effect on the person who lost their job, it's an effect on the entire family. So as you can see, it affects everyone, and it can have a traumatic effect. But again, under age, the employer must have 20 or more employees working for 20 or more weeks in the current or preceding year. And why do I mention those things under Title VII and the ADEA? Is because jurisdiction is something that EEOC that we always have to look at to make sure that we have jurisdiction to conduct an investigation against a particular employer. Again, there's Don Draper's picture, and again, as I stated, we're more diverse today. Now, the ADA Amendments Act. The ADA took effect in 1990. As a matter of fact, the ADA had its birthday this year, 30 years old. The one thing about the ADA, and it's the Americans with Disabilities Act, who is affected by the ADA? Everyone. What I like to say is that you may not have a disability today, but if we live long enough, we're all going to have a disability of some sort because our bodies just aren't meant to last forever. So we're all going to have disabilities. But we also have to remember, because we're all going to have those disabilities, we got to learn how to respect folk who do have disabilities and make sure that there are opportunities for everyone. Now, how's a person covered under the ADA? Well, either they have a real disability, a record of a disability, or they're regarded as having a disability. And I'd like to give you some examples of that. Some disabilities that are real, you can see. As you see on the slide here, this person, they're substantially limited in the major life activity of walking. However, there are some real disabilities that you can't see. Again, in the meeting I was in this morning, we were talking about some of the challenges during COVID-19 and people working at home, teleworking. Well, a great many people who work at home right now and teleworking, those people, they may suffer from mental impairments. And one example of a mental impairment is PTSD. And one of the things that can happen with PTSD is a person may need interaction with others to help them to stabilize their condition. And in this environment, that can be a challenge. So as an employers, what I say to them, as I mentioned in the meeting this morning, we have to find those unique ways of making sure that we engage with employees to make sure that we're taking care of that person who has that real disability, PTSD, that you can't see. A record of a disability example would be, as Monica mentioned, I used to be, in my other life, I used to be in the military. Well, a lot of my buddies, they were airborne rangers. They jumped out of airplanes. Well, there's something that happens when you jump out of airplanes for 20 years. You have an impact on your ankles and your knees, your back, and a lot of those folk, they develop impairments and disabilities. Well, you can't see it, and sometimes the person can jump out of bed, run 5 miles, no problem. But a lot of them folk, they may have a record of an impairment from just jumping out of that plane years ago on their back, their knees, or their ankles. A third way a person can be covered under the ADA is to be regarded as having a disability. Here's an example for you on that. Situation that I looked at years ago was someone who went to their optometrist to get their eyes checked. And while they were at the optometrist said, hey, you have a condition known as retinitis pigmentosus. What that particular condition is that the person's peripheral vision is going to narrow, and over time, the person will go blind. Um, the doctor couldn't tell that person how long it was going to take. It could have taken 20, 25 years before that occurred. Well, this individual went back and told the employer, hey, I just left my optometrist. They just diagnosed me with retinitis pigmentosus. I just want to let you know because I drive an 18-wheeler truck and I felt you should know this about my vision. Well, the employer did not consider, well, wait a minute, does this person have a disability today? The employer said, yeah, you, from what you're telling us, you've got this condition, you're going to lose your vision, so you're fired. So clearly in that situation, the employer made a decision because they regarded the individual as having a disability. At that time, the individual had just been diagnosed. Their vision was still 20/20. So as you can see, the employer, they kind of jumped the gun a little bit. But those are the ways to be covered under the ADA. There's also a jurisdictional requirement, meaning that the employer has to have 15 or more employees for each calendar workday of 20 or more weeks in the current or preceding year. The other thing under the ADA is that a person must be qualified for the job that they're able to do, that they are in, and they must be able to perform the job with or without a reasonable accommodation. And we'll talk a little bit more about accommodation under the ADA and accommodation under religion as we go forward. Now, the Equal Pay Act. The Equal Pay Act is, it came into effect in 1963. I like to think that equal pay, there's an issue because again, still in America, women are paid less than men in many industries. We have to figure a way how to fix that. Again, I don't think that's just an EEOC mission. That's a mission for each and every one of us to figure out if it is occurring in a work site and how do we fix it. One of the things that occurred with the Equal Pay Act is, if you recall, in World War II, and I always like to give the props where they belong. In World War II, the people who built the tanks and the airplanes and all the weapons, those were women that were building those because a lot of the males had gone off to Europe and to the South Pacific to fight the war. So as a result, women were doing those jobs. But after the war, when the men came back, the men wanted their jobs back, but they also wanted to make more money than the women. As you can see, the problem is that the women were performing equal work and they deserved equal pay. Some of the things that we look at under equal pay is skill, effort, and responsibility, to determine why a person is being paid and what they should be paid. Now, what are some of the defenses that an employer can make under the Equal Pay Act? The employer gets 4 defenses if someone makes a complaint under the Equal Pay Act. The employer can say that they paid the other person more based on seniority, or it could have been paid more based on merit, or it could have been incentive or a reasonable factor other than sex. But one of the things that EEOC has to look at is to determine what is the real reason why this individual is making more. So the other thing we have to look at always is jurisdiction. So the employer has to have at least one employee. That lets you know every employer is covered by the Equal Pay Act. And we're going to look to determine what does the person actually do. I say that in this context is that when we look at job descriptions, many people they have a job description, but they may not necessarily do what's in the job description. So one of the things that we do at EEOC to determine under equal pay, what is a person doing, is we talk to the individual. Tell us exactly what you do in a day or in a week. What are the job tasks that you perform? And the person that they feel is making more than them, if that person is still employed there, we're going to ask that person, well, what did you do? So that we can make that comparison, so we can make that decision. Now, here's something that also cannot happen. And this is a real world story of something that I saw a few years ago. There was this one particular employer, and they had lots and lots of people that were performing stocking jobs, meaning they would stock products on the shelves and things like that. It was like at a department store. And one of the things that was going on is that we had a woman that came and made a complaint indicating that she was being paid less than her male counterparts. And then we got a complaint from 2 other women who said the same thing. So when we reached out to the employer stated, well, it could not be discrimination based on equal pay because the HR manager is a woman, and that because she's a woman, she decided to pay the women less. Well, of course, that didn't really make any sense, but we still needed to find out why were they paying the men more, if they were, and what exactly did the folk do. So we interviewed these 3 individuals to find out what their job was, and then we interviewed some male employees to find out what they did at the work. And we found out they were doing the exact same job in the same establishment under the same conditions. And so then, we had to determine, well, what is going on? And so we found out that the males were making $12 an hour and all the females were making $10 an hour. So how did the employer correct it? They did the wrong thing. They decided to reduce the pay of the male employees, which was the wrong thing to do. The correct thing to do, and what we were able to negotiate with them, was to increase the pay of those female workers and also to bring the male employee back up to the wages that they were working. Because again, it is equal work, it deserves equal pay, and that's how you fix that. Now, the first act that President Obama signed was the Lilly Ledbetter Fair Pay Act. And basically what it does is it eliminates the statute of limitations in the defense of a disparate treatment case, meaning each and every time a person receives a paycheck, that is a new incident of being paid less wages. That's really important. And so one of the things that we always try to tell folk is that, if you feel like you're being paid less and you think it's based on one of the protected bases, especially based on equal pay, to let us know. Make a complaint. The other thing that's important to know about the Equal Pay Act is it is a sex-based law, meaning that it is a female being paid less than a male employee. So that's what we have to look at. Now, the next statute that we enforce is the Genetic Information Non-Discrimination Act of 2009. And what it does is it prohibits an employer from using a genetic condition or family medical information when it makes employment decisions. Does that occur? Yeah. An example was I was in a situation once in which someone had complained to our organization, and they indicated that the employer had called everyone into a room and stated, hey, identify if you have any one in your family that has a particular condition. And many of the employees said yes, yes, yes. And that employer actually took action against those employees who said yes, and they let them go. That was the wrong thing to do. And we were able to resolve that. And it was about educating the employer. Now, the other thing that should not happen, and it doesn't happen today the way it used to, because nowadays most applications are electronic. But there were times that some employers used to, on their employment applications, would ask someone, do you have a particular health condition, and does someone in your family have a particular health condition? The employer can't do that, and they should not do that, okay? And make decisions based on a person's genetic condition. One of the movies that I think about, and some of you may never have watched the movie, but I urge you to do so. It was a movie called Gattaca, and it was one of those futuristic movies in which all the employees, they had to have your DNA tested before they could get a job, and so everything that a person did was based on genetics. Thank goodness that President Bush, that he signed a Genetic Information Non-Discrimination Act in 2009, so that we don't look at those things. Here's something else I'd like to just share with you regarding the ADA and GINA, some of the differences. Under the ADA, think of it as a medical condition that a person has. When we think of GINA, because it's genetic, it might be a medical condition that a person they don't have now, but they may get. Good example. Um, let's say someone took a physical. A woman took a physical, and during the physical, her physician said, "Oh, you know, we in our testing, we noticed that you have a a gene that would make you susceptible to breast cancer." Well, it doesn't mean the person's ever going to get breast cancer. It just means that they have that gene. But if the employer found that out and took action against that individual, that would be wrong, and that would be something that EEOC could take a look at. Now, what is the investigative process? Well, it always starts with the theories of discrimination. Um, some of the theories of discrimination, and I'll just try to give those to you, is one is disparate treatment. Disparate treatment means is looking at things differently. Let's say that you like apples, but I like oranges. Well, because you like apples and I like oranges, if I put a bowl of fruit out, your chances are you're always going to take the apple before you ever take an orange. Even if there were 10 oranges in the basket and one apple, because you have that, you know, you like apples, you would probably take the apple. So that's disparate treatment. And the way we look at it is that how does an employer treat someone based on their race, color, sex, etc.? Are they treating them differently because of that difference in race or the difference in sex, religion, etc.? Another theory of discrimination is disparate impact. An example of disparate impact is that an employer has a neutral policy, um, and that neutral policy appears to apply to all employees, but it may have an adverse impact upon a particular group of people. A good example would be this. Let's say that the employer, let's say they're a trucking company, and this trucking company decides that, hey, we've got a new policy. Anybody who's absent for 14 days or longer at a time uh, will automatically be terminated on day number 15. You can reapply for the job, but you're automatically going to be terminated on day number 15 if you're out for more than 14 days. Well, because it applies to everyone, it seems like it could be a fair policy. But what if the person has a medical condition that's a disability? Then that means anyone with a disability that might require them to be absent for more than 14 days, that would have an adverse impact upon their ability to work. In that situation, we would work with the employer to correct um, that policy. Now, in that example, did the employer set out to discriminate? No, they didn't. So the difference between disparate treatment and disparate impact is disparate treatment discrimination is intentional, meaning you meant to terminate someone because of their race, their color, their sex. Disparate impact, it doesn't have to be intentional. Another theory of discrimination could be harassment. Another is retaliation. And another theory of discrimination is accommodation. And as I mentioned to you, the theory of accommodation applies to religion under Title VII, and it also applies to accommodation for individuals that may have disabilities. Keeping in mind that under religion, a person that when an employer looks at the accommodation, it has to be, they look at diminished cost, meaning they have to look and see if they can provide the accommodation, uh, but it may not cost them a whole lot to provide that accommodation. Good example, the accommodation might be that an individual says that based on my religion, let's say they're a Seventh-day Adventist, and they indicated, you know, I can't work after sunset on Friday until sunset on Saturday. But let's say they work a third shift job at night. Well, they can't work on Friday nights. So the employer might say, well, you know what? We're going to accommodate you. You don't have to work on Friday night, but we want you back on Saturday night. That's an accommodation. Under the Americans with Disabilities Act, an accommodation might be, and again, always keeping in mind, the person must have a real disability to be accommodated under the ADA. Or a record of a disability, but they don't have to be accommodated if they're regarded as having a disability. But an accommodation under the ADA might be, hey, that because of my medical condition and the medication that I take, I might need my schedule adjusted. Well, that's what we call the interactive process. The employer talking with the employee to see what accommodation can be made. And one of the things we always urge is for the employer to have that conversation, because the employee is probably going to know what's the best thing for the individual. The next thing that we do is we use what we call the models of proof. The model of proof is basically, I like to look at it as a mathematical kind of theory or situation. An example would be, let's say an individual alleges, hey, and again, I want to look at the model of proof as a pie. Think of it as a pie with 3 slices. And in that slice of the pie, the individual makes an allegation. And the allegation could be, I believe that I was terminated from my position because of my race, black, but someone not of my race was treated more favorable. You see, that's called, the first piece of the pie is the element of proof, the individual making a prima facie case. One is they must demonstrate that they are a member of a protected group, and they are, because with the example, based on their race, black. 2, that they were subjected to an adverse employment decision. 3, that someone not within their group was treated more favorable. Now, what happens after that? Well, if they establish a prima facie case, then we have to notify the employer that a charge of discrimination has been filed against their organization. Now, the employer gets to make a defense, meaning the second slice of the pie is they get to articulate their legitimate non-discriminatory reason for the action they took. Because, although the individual felt that they were terminated because of their race, black, the employer might state, well, hey, no, the real reason they were terminated was because of um, they had an attendance issue, or maybe they were having a reduction in force. So one of the things that we look for with the employer is to determine, are they making a justification for their defense, or are they denying their defense? But either way, we're going to look to determine what is the employer's legitimate non-discriminatory reason that they're saying they took the action. The next thing is to get to pretext, meaning pretext is we've got the element of proof that the complaining party made. We've got the defense from the employer. Now we have to determine, using pretext, do we believe it? And that's what pretext is about. Do we believe what the employer is saying? Is there comparative data? The individual said that someone not of their race was treated more favorable. Well, let's say that the employer indicates, well, hey, they had an attendance issue. Well, we would look to determine, what is the attendance records of others within that job position that the complaining party works in, to determine, are they being treated fairly? The next thing we might look at, I'm going to go to the next slide, is we may look at, is there statistical data there that we would look at? Or is it just a lie? Or was there a bias on the behalf of the decision maker? We would take all of those things into account. Now, after we look at pretext, we're going to make a determination. If we believe the employer's legitimate non-discriminatory reason, then we would issue a notice of right to sue to both parties. Once we issue that right to sue, the complaining party, that we call the charging party, would have 90 days in which to file suit in federal court. They could also at that time request a copy of the investigation that we completed. And there are many things out of the investigative file that they would be entitled to. But let's say that we didn't believe the employer's legitimate non-discriminatory defense. Well, if we didn't believe it, then what we would do is we would issue what we call a cause determination, meaning that there's reasonable cause to believe that discrimination did occur. We would notify the parties in writing, and at that point, we would also do a damages interview with the charging party to determine, did they lose anything? Because what we're really trying to do is, if they lost something, is how do we make them whole? Making them whole as to if the discrimination never occurred. Then we're going to have a discussion with the employer and to let the employer know, hey, this is the reason why we made our determination and why we feel that discrimination did occur. And these are the damages that we're seeking on behalf of this individual, or it may be a group of individuals. But the thing that's important is we want to make sure that both sides, the charging party and the employer, that they both understand how we got to our decision to see if we can work it out. We are hopeful that once we notify the employer of why we made our decision and the damages that we're seeking, we're going to enter into what we call conciliation. That is a forum in which we sit down with the employer and the charging party to see if we can work through the issues. Sometimes in conciliation, believe it or not, the thing to work through is we need to educate the employer, and maybe their managers and their employees to ensure that the discrimination never occurs again. So we may do, ask them to do training, and training is always a good thing. We may ask them to change their policies. We may seek back wages, or if the first person was terminated, to see that they're reinstated. Again, we're trying to make the individual whole if we found that a violation occurred, to make them whole as if discrimination never occurred. However, there are some times that we do issue the violation and we just can't get there with the employer. Doesn't mean that the employer is saying no because they disagree with us. They may have their own reasons for why they do not wish to enter into an agreement to resolve the matter. If that occurs, there are times that EEOC would refer the matter to our legal unit. Our legal unit, they are responsible for litigation, and that is handled by the Office of our General Counsel, who will decide whether or not a lawsuit would be filed. The key thing that is important to know, that throughout the entire process of dealing with the initial complaint that came in from the charging party, or working with the employer, it's all about developing relationships and trying to work through the issues. Because I like to believe at the beginning and the end of the day that what we're really trying to do for the workforce is to make sure that an equal opportunity exists in the workplace, so that one, we're able to meet our mission, two, we're able to ensure that the vision of that respectful and inclusive workplace takes place, and three, to make sure that we're able to help make those promises come through true of the life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And again, through employment. That is my take and just overview of EEOC. I'd be happy to entertain any questions that you might have.
That was a fantastic presentation, Mr. Colclough. Thank you so much. Monica, if you would advise if there are any questions in the chat.
Absolutely. Let me take a look here and see if we have any questions. We're happy to answer any questions.
There doesn't appear to be any questions in the chat at this moment.
Okay. Well,